Welcome everyone. My name is Micah, and in today's video I would like to talk a little bit about what is basic music theory. So if you are brand new to music, the great thing about music theory is that it covers all kinds of instruments, and so it's not just related to one. So the very first thing that we should talk about are some basic notes, and some of the notes that you're going to encounter in basic music theory are going to be the notes A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. So there's a couple points that I want to make here about this. First off, I want you to understand that there is no H in music theory. There's no H. So when we get to G, what we do is we actually just start over again at A. And that's, if you notice in this, I put a little line here to show you that that it just starts over. So our basic music theory, our alphabet would basically go something like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And it would repeat that over and over again. So you would have an A through G. Then it would start again. A through G. Then it would start again. A through G. And it would keep doing that ad infinitum forever. Now, so the alphabet really doesn't start on an A, and it really doesn't end on a G, but that's how the best way that I can relate it for you guys, since you probably already know that A is the start of the English alphabet. But it really has no start at A, and it really doesn't necessarily end at G. So you could really think of the music alphabet that we use for music, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. It's more like a conveyor belt, or it's more like an escalator where we just start at one point, and it just goes around in a circle. It never ends. There's really, just like a good circle would be, there's no starting point and there's really no ending point. So whatever point you decide to start at, you just keep going around and around in a circle, and that would essentially be your music alphabet. Now, one thing that I want you to understand, or I want you to kind of notice or take notice, is that when I wrote some of these notes up here, I didn't. You notice that there's actually some holes, and so we're going to talk about what that is going to represent in some future videos. So one of the first things that you need to understand before we talk about why those holes are there are intervals and some basic distances. So I'm going to go and start kind of going over that. So let's go ahead and talk about what an interval is. So an interval, it's a really basic concept. An interval is going to be the distances of between two tones. So an interval is going to equal distances, musical distances. Now, we're not talking about inches or feet or yards or miles or something of that nature. We're actually talking about auditory distances or oral distances. We're talking about distances that you measure with your ear, distances between pitches, between one note and the other. And there's some basic distances that you really want to familiarize yourselves with. One of those distances is called a half step. One of those distances is called a half step. The other distance that you're going to really want to familiarize yourself with is called a whole step. And these are some really basic distances that you're going to need. A half step in music, a half step is going to be the distance between two adjacent notes. Two adjacent notes. And the distances for a whole step here are going to be skipping over a note. So skips over a note, skips a note. So let's talk about each of these distances. So a half step is going to be this distance right here. That is a half step, and we'll just put a little half there so you understand. So that is the distance of a half step. This would also be the distance of a half step from B to C. From B to C is considered a half step, and from E to F is considered a half step. And it's just basically the shortest distance that you can have in music, at least in Western music. So when you get into some of the Asiatics and things like that, they might have 36 tones in their scale. We actually use 12 tones in our scale. I know that you only currently see 7 notes up here on this board, plus the A, which makes 8, but we'll talk about that later on. So what you want to understand is that the distance from B to C is considered a half step. So a half step is just the shortest distance that you can have in music. E to F is also considered a half step. The next thing that we'll look at is what's called a whole step, and I'll go ahead and there we go, it's kind of sloppy, it works. A whole step is going to be the distance where we skip over a note. So if, for example, if I went from here to here, notice there's a gap. That's because there's something missing right here that I haven't inputted yet, and we're going to learn about that in a future video. But the distance from D to E would be considered a whole step, or the distance from F to G would be considered a whole step. The distance from A to B would be considered a whole step. The distance from C to D would be considered a whole step, or the distance from G to A would be considered a whole step. If we were looking at a piano, we would say that those distances are going to be essentially from one white key to another, except for maybe the E, F, or the B, C. But for the most part, it would be one white key to another. And generally, the distances of a half step would be from one white key to a black key, to the next adjacent black key. And there's some exceptions to that rule, but essentially that's about it. And if you're playing a guitar, you might say that the half step distance is from, let's say, fret 3 to fret 4, or fret 5 to fret 6, or fret 12 to fret 11. It's two adjacent frets. And a whole step would be skipping over a fret.